For beats, I'm going to go to a fed applet that is called resonance. For some reason that is in motion. I guess these springs are moving here. The concept mostly stems from sound, but if you imagine that these are shock absorbers, then you can see that, yeah, typical springs do that too. Resonance. I actually don't want to use this for resonance, but as I said, for beats, you can see here, I'm going to pause this, you can see here that the frequency of the spring itself is 1.00 hertz, and I'm going to calculate that at a later time, how that can be determined from the mass and the spring constant. And then the frequency of the driver was 1.00 hertz, and so matching those two frequencies gives the catastrophic resonance that I will show later. As said, for now I want to use this one for beats, so I'm going to push the damping constant first down to 0.1. I'm going to turn this one here to 1.16. That has a reason why I want to have this 0.16 here, you'll see. So I'm going to set this here on, and you can see how it moves about. So the spring itself wants to vibrate with 1.00 hertz, but the driver is pushing with a frequency of 1.16 hertz, and you can see how it swings up and down, but then it seems to stop there for a moment. The driver continuously goes up and down, but the block itself seems to stop. And so we get a beat in here, and I'm gonna time that here just by looking at a clock that I have in my office. When it stops the next time, I'm gonna start now. Yep, okay, and then it stops again. That's the first stop. And then the second stop right there, and then the third one right there, and I get 18 seconds. Of course, the very first stop was actually my zero stop, so I get 18 seconds, and for 3 beats, so which means I have a beat time of 6 seconds, and that's why it shows this one here, the 0.16 behind it. So the two frequencies are different. In, you can see here 1.00 hertz, and here it's 1.16 hertz. So they differ by 0.16 hertz, which matches the 6 seconds for the beats. So the beat frequency is 0.16 hertz. You take the reciprocal of that, which is 6 seconds for the beats. This is for showing a standing wave, and I'm going to use the wave on a string applet. And I'm going to choose oscillate, loose end. I'm going to change the amplitude just 10. So relatively small, so that's actually not doing much over here. And the frequency, I want to change that to begin with to 15. And the damping to 5. And let's see. I think I can actually change the number. There we go. Okay, and I'm just going to leave it like this. And I believe we can see quite well that here we have an antinode here. You see it's relatively still here. And here we have an antinode here. The diagrams that you see in the book, they of course look perfect, but this one is more like a real string, where of course the antinode is just vibrating ever so slightly, just a little bit off from the theoretical one. Of course we can nicely see a crest, trough, crest, trough. So we have 2 antinodes here for a frequency of 15. Of course that's again percentage. We would have to measure what the actual frequency is. I'm going to increase the frequency to 25% of its maximum value. And I tested these numbers before to see what I end up with, and we can pretty much see here's an antinode, here's another one, and pretty close to here, here's a third one, so we have 3 antinodes with here trough, and crest, trough, and crest, and crest, and trough, crest, and trough. And then I'm going to increase that to just 30 and give it a moment so that it can adjust itself to the new frequency. And that's somewhere around here, and pretty much here, and pretty much right here. So we have 3 nodes here, with this one here being perhaps a fourth one, or the zero, I'm sorry, antinodes, and this one here being the 0 antinode, and then here we have number 1 and number 2 and number 3. So over the entire length we have like 3.5 half wavelengths we're gonna fit in here. And I have to stop this one here. So keep that in mind that this is 3.5. I'm gonna measure the length here. So if this is a vibrating string, then its length is 100 centimeter. And then I want to measure the actual frequency, so I'm going to get the timer here. I'm just going to pause this here on the crest. One moment, right there. Okay. I'm going to hit the play button and I will count 10 ups and downs. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, I come up with 9.16 seconds, which means that for one up and down swing, of course, that's 0.916 seconds. And now the calculation that I'm going to do of that is the one for the standing wave. That is open on one end, which means actually it's a tube open at one end. I mean, we used a string here. That's the same idea, but real musical instruments, only tubes would be loose on one end. So that's why I see those diagrams in the book, while here I was able to show actually a string that is loose on one end. And so string or tube on one end. See how my handwriting goes here. There's that. String open on one end, and that equation is Fn equals n V over 4L. Okay, and what I did was that I determined n already. I said there were 3 antinodes in there, and then one to the 0th one to the very left, respectively. I had 3.5 half wavelengths in there, and when it comes to the tube open at only one end, you read through the book, they actually go by quarter wavelengths. So my 3.5 means that I have 7 quarter wavelengths, because the total length of a tube or a string open on one end is an odd integer of quarter wavelengths. So that's what I should come up with. My F here is the inverse of the time that I measured, the 0.916 seconds inverted, because frequency, of course, is the period inverted. The V here I take from a previous measurement where I measured about 60 centimeters per second on that particular string. So I'm gonna call, I'm just gonna call this one here 60 centimeters per second. Kind of rounded. Earlier I measured 56 or 58, depending on how I measured it. And then the total length here is not a rounded 100, but really I tried to measure to the closest centimeter, so this one is 100 centimeter. And the algebra is going to be that the number of quarter wavelengths I should have would be Fn times 4L divided by V. So when I plug in those numbers, which is 0.916 inverted as 1.09 times 4 times 100 centimeter divided by 60 centimeter, I come up with 7.3, which is relatively close to what I was supposed to come up, 7.3 or 7 quarter wavelengths. And that's kind of what we can see in here. Is it still the same thing? Yeah, so I have like one full wavelength here, which is 4 quarter wavelengths, and then I have another 3 quarters, so I have a total of 7 quarter wavelengths. Here I show standing waves in a Kunst tube. I'm going to go to Hyperphysics and Sound and Hearing and Standing Waves. And then here, of course, you have the same descriptions as you have in books, or equivalent descriptions. And then I'm going to get to here, and this here is the Kunst tube video. And before it starts loading right now, this is the way it's set up. Here's cork dust. Oops. Let me just start this here. So here's cork dust in here, and it's closed on one end and closing on the other end with a little metal disc. And then actually this part here, this metal rod here, is being stroked with a piece of cloth, and that produces this really annoying sound that you will hear it very soon. And then so there's a sound wave, of course, going out everywhere, but the important one is the one that's going in, being reflected on the other end. And if the length here fits exactly a multiple of half wavelengths, you see it's closed on both ends, then we'll get a standing wave, and that's what's being shown in this video. So please excuse this really annoying sound that it produces. And of course we can see really nicely here the antinodes where nothing is happening, and then here the nodes where we have from crest to trough.